Welcome to the September 30th edition of the CGO webinar. I'm Sue Walton. I am the administrator of the council, and it is my pleasure to introduce Ted Gortney, who is the president of the council, and he in turn will introduce our master of ceremonies today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. It's my pleasure to introduce Nicholas Tiedemann, who's going to be introducing Dirk Lohr, our speaker today. Nick, as you know, is a professor at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Nick, if you would introduce our speaker.
Yes, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Dirk Lohr, who is a longtime appreciator of the virtues of land value taxation and a professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Trier, Germany. And he was recently instrumental in introducing some land value taxation in Germany. And I am as eager as you probably are to hear exactly what he has done. Dirk, over to you.
Many thanks, Nick, for the introduction. So let's have a look whether it works or not. I hope it does. Okay, do you see what you should see?
Yes.
My PowerPoint slides, that's good, that's a good beginning. So let's start. It's about the land value tax campaign in Germany and what happened there. First, what was the beginning? There was a window of opportunity. This window of opportunity happened because it was clear that the property tax had to be reformed. There have been many attempts, and people knew that if the property tax comes to the Constitutional Court, it will be cancelled. It was a question of time. And so beforehand, there have been many attempts to reform the old property tax we had. It was a crazy tax. It was based on values of 1964 in the western part and of 1935 in the eastern part. So it didn't reflect the structure of values, and it also didn't reflect the level of values. The tax values were about 10% of the market values of real estate. So it was a little bit crazy. Nonetheless, many attempts in order to reform this property tax failed. Also, the tax in Germany has not a high importance. It only collects 2% of the total revenues. As far as I'm informed, in the United States, it's about 12%, the property tax. So the OECD always says Germany do more, shift some tax away from income tax, from value-added tax and so on property tax. But nonetheless, they're not doing it. It's only 2%, but everybody is affected. So it was a very sensitive issue for most politicians, and they didn't want to tackle it. So it was no surprise that in April 2018, the Constitutional Court rejected the old property tax. Everybody had expected that. And yeah, the old property tax, it taxed the property as a whole, which means the land and the upstanding building. And now the big question was, what system has to replace the old tax system? The Constitutional Court said that the legislator has a wide scope of possibilities, but it also said that the new valuation rules have to make clear the rationale of the tax. The legislator cannot make it arbitrarily. There must be some logic behind it. The tax base has to tie up to this rationale. And what is very interesting, Also, the relation of the assets of the different buildings, of the different real estate, has to be represented. It has to represent this ration. And this is a big issue right now, still now. Today I submitted another article about the Lower Saxony tax. I will talk about that later. So what about our campaigns and the actors? The German land value tax campaign started already in 2012, when we could see that there will be a revision of the tax. And it was quite interesting. We collected a lot of actors, different actors from different fields, from different political fields. For instance, the NABU, this is a natural protection organization. We had our office, we had a fixed office in Berlin. This was in the NABU headquarters. The second biggest, or the second big natural protection organization is BUND. Both supported us. NABU was even stronger involved. We had the Tenants Association in Germany. They also gave us strong support. We had some Planners Association, like here SRL, or also architects, some institutes which were dealing with land, with dwelling, with living, like this one here. And this is quite interesting. This is a quite famous institute which is near to companies. The Institute of German Economy in Cologne. This is quite neoclassical. Nonetheless, they also supported us. Whereas the Natural Protection Organization, they wanted to have a more efficient use of land. The tenants organizations, of course, they wanted to have a release of the tenants. They wanted to have more buildings, higher supply, and thus less rents. The planners wanted to have a higher compliance. The architects didn't want to spend most money for the land and not having left something for the building. And the institute here, the Neoclassical Institute, they wanted to have higher efficiency in the economy as a whole. And also quite interesting, also the workers' unions on the construction sector, they also supported us. So it was a quite heterogeneous alliance, but nonetheless, it reflects what Mason Gaffney always said is a program of reconciliation. And we can put people with different political opinions here inside this union. And this happened. What did we do? We had a lot of talks with associations, with landowners associations, with industrial associations, and so on, lobbyists. We talked with politicians, with many politicians on the federal level, on the state level. We had a lot of ministers of finance from different provinces we were talking with. We also had close contacts with scientists, and I may say that there's a big sympathy of most economists to the land value tax proposal. However, some economists are also paid, and if they are paid well enough, they don't support this proposal. We had a lot of press activities, a lot of articles we were writing, also scientific articles, radio, television, social media. We had Twitter accounts, we have Facebook accounts, and so on. And as I told you, very important, we also had a business office. We have been supported by some municipalities, private donors. Also, the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation contributed, which was very helpful. So with this office, we also could make press releases, we could keep the contact to politicians, we could make further fundraising. This was very important. We had it in Berlin in the NABU, this Natural Protection Organization. As I told you, many cities supported us, also big cities, for instance, Düsseldorf. And this guy here, this is Boris Palmer. He's an, as the French say, enfant terrible, terrible child. He's a green politician. Everybody in Germany knows him. However, almost they kicked him out from the Green Party, but he supported us very much, and he also was responsible that we were successful in Baden-Württemberg. We had a lot of NGOs, I told you, and also private donors which supported us. Without all these guys, it wouldn't have been possible. Here you see our homepage with some of these supporters we had. These are all organizations. We had more than 2,000 private people who also supported us. Yeah, here you see some articles. This is Ulrich Kriese, the spokesman of the NABU for settlement and so on. He was my main partner, and both of us, we founded this campaign, and he was also very, very active. And without him, it wouldn't have been possible either. Here we had television. This is a political report at prime time, and they also were very friendly on the land value tax proposal. It is a model against the problem of high rents and missing flats and so on. They said we had in big newspapers, they gave us space to launch some articles like here. And you see here is Henry George and Stieglitz and so on. We had a lot of possibilities to push this issue. Okay, nonetheless, it was not easy. It was anything but easy. In the year 2019, after a lot of discussion, they launched the federal property tax reform. And the premise of this reform was that there should not be any further increase of taxes. There was no discussion about shan't we make a tax shift or something. The only discussion was don't give further burden on the tenants, don't give further burdens on the homeowners. And this was a little bit castrated discussion. Nonetheless, it was the way the lobbyist launched it. What was the concept? The concept also basically for all models which were discussed was the same. We have a tax base. In the case of the land value tax, it is the land value. In the case of the property tax, which has been launched by the Federation, it is the market value or something similar to it. There's put a basic rate on it, which has been fixed by the Federation in this case, and the product is the base value. And then the municipalities are allowed to put an own collection rate on this base value, and this is the property tax. The property tax flows into the budget of the municipalities. It is a municipality tax. And the second important tax after the business tax in Germany. So when we are looking at the federal model, what do we see? We have the property as a whole, which is taxed, the land and the building. When we are looking at the dwelling, living, then it is done by taking the revenues and discounting the revenues. The target is to approximately to get to the market values with appraisal. However, it doesn't work. I will say something on that later on. There's an optional tax added. This is the so-called property tax C. A is for agriculture, B is for other buildings like living and also commercial buildings. And C is an extra tax on unused land, and the municipalities have the right to put an own tax rate on these unused land. How is the approach, the federal tax approach, how does it work? I told you they take rents which are discounted, but how are they doing? They don't take the real rents, they take fictional rents. And the clue is they do not differ according to the location. So if you have a flat or a house in a very good location, you have the same tax rent as in a house in a very poor location, which means that the value in a very poor location is comparatively high, and in a very good location, it is comparatively low. It is far away from the market value, and it is regressive because it is taxing the poor locations higher relatively to the good locations. And this all is done within a very complex system of valuation. It is close to the market assessment, but the way they are putting in the data, it is beyond good and evil, how they are doing. Furthermore, we don't have any escape clause. We have no hardship provision or anything. Nonetheless, this guy will be probably our next chancellor. We had elections last weekend. This is Scholz from the Social Democrats, and he pushed it very much, and he pushed it in accordance with the rent grabbers association, as I want to call them, because they have their stakes in the very good locations and they don't pay so much. And this is what they wanted. And on the other hand, this guy wanted to sell his party that he is doing a first step into a wealth tax. And this was why the Social Democrat Party also supported this proposal to make a property tax, which is taxing the land as well as the upstanding building. They saw that the real estate is the most important asset in the economy. And so for them, it was a first step inside the wealth tax. They wanted to have a wealth tax. Still, they want to have a wealth tax. This was also the reason why the leftists also supported this. And this was also the reason why at least the Green Party, at least the federal actors of the Green Party also supported this. Although in the Green Party, at the lower level, in the provinces and so on, in the states, they were also very much in favor of the land value tax. But at the top protagonists in the federation, they supported this system of wealth tax, which also the Social Democrats supported. Yeah, here we had a hearing in the Finance Committee of the Federal Parliament. It was in 9/11 in 2019. And quite interesting, there was this woman here. This is a famous tax professor in Germany. And she also was in favor of the land value tax. She criticized very much the federal property tax as they wanted to launch it. And she said, why don't you make a land value tax? So all the problems you have with this federal tax, you get rid of. I also was there. We said the same. It was a duo we were singing. We sang the same song. And nonetheless, it was the political logic which dominated in the end. We were not successful in this stage. Yeah, I told you, 2019, a federal model was launched and a property tax C, particularly for unused land. But this was the point. We also had a revision of the constitution. The Conservative Party of Bavaria, which was in coalition with the other conservatives, they said we only agree if the constitution is changed. So we want the states to have the possibility to make own tax laws which deviate from the federal model. They were not convinced of the federal model, but for a complete different reason. So the constitution was changed, and the constitution was written, you states are allowed to deviate from this federal model. And this was what Baden-Württemberg did in the end. However, considering agriculture and forestry, this is the so-called property tax A, all those states who deviate from the federal model adapt the tax on agriculture and forestry. The simple reason for that is that more than 60 other laws and rules are connected with the property tax A. It's, for instance, the pension schemes for the farmers, or also there are the insurance of the farmers. It's all connected with rules of the property tax A. So most of those states who are deviating from the federal model, they say, nonetheless, this property tax A concerning agriculture and forestry, we keep. We take this federal model, then we don't have that much trouble. The values will be fixed on 2022. This means the tax base is based on the values of 2022. However, the tax declaration will affect the year 2025. The old system runs until 2025. From 2025 on, we will have the new system in the federation and in the states. This was a premise from the Constitutional Court. They said, if you make the old system longer, it will be cancelled. People don't have to pay anymore the old tax. From 2025 on, you have to make a new tax, and you have to take it from the taxpayers. Who were the renegades? So some of you, I'm looking at Nick, know Germany very well. So what do you see here? This is Germany. You see here the flag, the German flag. This means here you see the different states. Where you see the German flag, these are all states which keep the federal model. For instance, North Rhine-Westphalia has the highest population. There was also a big discussion whether they should take the federal model or not. In the end, the conservatives, they were open to the land value tax model, but the Liberal Party, they didn't want to have it because they supported the rent grabbers. And so in the end, they said, okay, if we cannot agree upon, we take the federal model. This is why you see this here. Also, Schleswig-Holstein, it was the same. There's a coalition between Green Party and the Conservative Party. The Green Party wanted to have a land value tax, and the Conservative Party, they didn't want to have it. And there's a third partner, the Liberals. The Liberals also didn't want to have it. The Liberal Party played a very bad role in all this process. They really were in favor of the land grabbers in this regard. So most of these states adapted the federal model. There were some renegades. One of these renegades was Hamburg. This Olaf Scholz, who will be the next chancellor probably, he was in former times mayor of Hamburg. We also met him and tried to convince him, but this was not successful because he was also very close with the real estate industry. Lower Saxony, I will say something about it. They have their own model. Hessen will they have their own model. They are quite close, these models, and also Bavaria will have its own model. I will say something about that. They are quite closely connected here. And the only one who introduced land value tax was Baden-Württemberg here. Baden-Württemberg is quite important country. It is one of the hotspots of German industry. This is the country where Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, and so on, the car industry is located. So it's quite strong country. However, the valuation system is quite weak. Also later on that. It was a coalition between Greens and Conservatives. Nonetheless, the Green Party was in the lead, and they convinced the Conservatives to adapt the tax. And it was quite good because there were a lot of Green members of parliament who understood the land value tax, which is not natural. Okay, the other states, I told you this is Hamburg, Hessen, Lower Saxony, and also Bavaria had area or will introduce area-related models. For instance, Bavaria will only tax the area of building and land. It will not put any values into the tax base. Yeah? It also will be a model which taxes the space of the land and the space of the buildings. And then there is set a so-called equivalence number. For instance, one area of land is taxed with 4 cents, and 1 square meter of building is taxed with 50 cents. And then there's a basic rate and so on, which is a little bit deducted concerning dwelling. Yeah, and there's no value in it. Huh? Which also means that in Bavaria, a house in the middle of Munich, where the land value is about 160,000 euro, is the same as in the outskirts, in the suburbs of Munich, where the value maybe is only 500 or 300 euro. Huh? It's the same tax if only the size is the same. And that is crazy. I'm convinced this will be discussed very hot in front of the Constitutional Court. Then the other states, Hamburg, Lower Saxony, Hessen, they said, okay, this is appealing somehow. Our real estate companies, they are happy when we introduce it, but nonetheless, this is too much. No value at all. This is too much. This is obviously not just. So they said, okay, we are adapting this Bavarian model, only taxing the space of the land and the upstanding building, but we make a correction factor for the location. And this correction factor looks like that. We take the individual land value of the site. We set it into relation to the average land value of the whole city, and then we gave such an exponent of 0.3. Don't ask me how they come to the exponent of 0.3. There's no empirical evidence, and I also criticize this very much. And I think this will be a hot point of discussion in front of the courts later on. I guess in the year 2030, we will see a lot of these models in front of the constitutional courts. Not earlier, it's a pity. Yeah, this was the hearing in the budget committee of the State Parliament of Lower Saxony. I also was invited as an expert in May of 2021. And I also said this, that probably what they are doing here is unconstitutional, because in Germany we have a principle of equality, which means you have to treat equal things equal and unequal things unequal. And it is not allowed to treat unequal things equal as they are doing with this area-based taxes, even if they are making such a locational factor. And I told them, so if you are introducing such a tax, you are putting the budget of the municipalities at risk. And also the representatives of the municipalities, they were very critical about this. Nonetheless, it was political logic. They introduced this tax. I'm sure there will be a hot discussion in front of the courts later on. Here was about the what happened there in Lower Saxony. It was a newspaper, a political newspaper, and they criticized also. Yeah, what's the judgment? The judgment, when you're looking at these models, which are area-based, they are regressive concerning their distributional effects. So it means real estate in a good location has to pay basically the same or almost the same, a little bit more than real estate in a poor location. It doesn't reflect the difference of the values. Also, there's a shift of tax burden, I didn't mention this before, to industrial and commercial sites. They wanted to take down the tax on housing because housing, there are more voters, and they wanted to catch the voters. So they put the tax burden more on industrial and commercial sites, something which I also I don't like. This is also something which is without evidence, without any reason. Planning, allocation, not only the land, the space of the land is taxed, also the space of the upstanding houses is taxed. This means when you have a big house, when you create a lot of new living space, this is taxed correspondingly high. And this means the creation of new living space, of a higher supply of living space, it is taxed. And this is not good. We need more houses. We need more living space. And unused sites are almost not taxed. However, most of these taxes, they will allow that property tax C on unused sites can be attached. Not in Bavaria, but in the other states, this will be possible. So if it is implemented, for sure, it is easier, it is better, the administration is easier, not that costly as the federal model, but it is not an easy tax. The problem is, it is not easy to assess the space of a flat. Ted Gwardney is an assessor, probably he can confirm that. At least in Germany, it is not easy to say what is the space of a building. The space of the land is okay, but the space of the building, it's a complex issue. There are different regulations how to calculate the space of a building. The question is, for instance, what about the balcony? How much do you have to count for the balcony or such loggias? How much do you have to count for such loggias? Or when you have space to get through with the car, how do you count that? And what about the basement? If the basement is very low, how do you count that? And so on and so on. If you look on the different shapes of the different building, of the roofs of different building, so how do you count such a shape, and so on? That's not easy. And if you are looking, for instance, in the basement in Rhine-Palatinate, in the state of Rhine-Palatinate, you very often find these sort of basement, which are maybe 1 meter high. You can put some bottle of wine inside and maybe a pig if you have, but not more. That's all. How do you calculate the space of that? So it's not easy to do. If you're looking to commerce, to commercial real estate, then in Germany, we have a very unique logic considering the taxation. Everything which is connected with protection against weather, against cold, and so on, this is counted to the building, and everything which is connected with the operation of the company is not counted to the building, not assigned to the building, it is assigned to the machinery. So when you're looking, for instance, on this here, this floor, is this connected with the building protection against weather and so on. So then it would be counted as a floor, or is it connected with the machinery? It is not clear. And such examples you have very, 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 very often. And so it is anything but easy to calculate the space of buildings. And they always said it's an easy text. It's not an easy text. So let's come to Baden-Württemberg. They have a modified land value tax. Why modified? Also here was a discussion that with the land value tax, we're probably going to shift away. The tax burden will get away from commerce to dwelling. And this they didn't want to have for political reasons. And so they said, okay, we make the basic tax rate a little bit higher for commerce and a little bit lower for living. This is the reason why it is called modified land value tax. So what is the rationale? The rationale is equivalence. This means the state, the public gives some infrastructure to the citizens and they shall pay for it. The tax base correspondingly is the land area times the guiding land values. What does it mean, guiding land values? In Germany, in the construction code, we have the requirement that for each square meter in Germany, there should be assigned a value. But the value is not assigned for every site, but groups of sites with similar character, with similar value, with similar character are put together in a group. For instance, Nick knows our house in our settlement. Those houses which are very similar are put together in a group of sites with a similar value. This is the so-called guiding land values, which means not every site is assessed, but only groups of sites are assessed. So we have a lower basic rate for dwelling. It is a little bit reduced for 30%. And also for social housing and so on, we have further discounts, another 5%, and some more for memorial sites and so on, also lower basic rate. Can discuss a lot whether or not it's reasonable, but they did it. So only the guiding land value is taxed here. The law has been passed in November 2020, and so Baden-Württemberg was the first state which passed such a law. The government has been attacked very much by the association, by the lobbyists of real estate, and also by taxpayers lobbyists, which also played a very bad role in the whole discussion. And this was the reason why the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg made a meeting. This was in January 2020, and invited, for instance, this Professor Hai. This is this woman which I already introduced, this tax professor, and also Professor Eichberger. He was the chief court when the old property tax was rejected. He also came, and both of these lawyers, they said, okay, the land value tax is no problem, do it. So differently from the opinion of these lobbyists, they always said it's unconstitutional and blah, 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 blah. But these lawyers, which are very renowned lawyers, they said, no, no problem, just do it. Also economists, me and also Professor Zimmermann, who is also very well known economist in Germany, who we also said from an economic point of view, please do it. It's the best you can do. So here you see such a map of guiding values. You see, for instance, here, there are some zones of sites which similar characteristics, they are put together. and then a value is assigned. Here you see the value in this zone is 1,195 euro per square meter, and you see W for wohnen, this means dwelling, living. In others, you see, for instance, here MI, this means a mixed area, this is dwelling and also commerce and so on. And so every flat has a value assigned, and so this is a quite good system. However, this Germany-wide system also has problems. For instance, when we have such long sites which don't correspond with typical sites in such a zone, you have to know that inside such a zone, there's a typical site, is called the guiding value site, which means, okay, it is described, the site which we refer to is, for instance, 800 square meter, the size is 800 square meter, and the value is 1,195. The length and the width is all fixed, but there are always other sites which don't suit this reference site. For instance, here, this here suits the reference site, but here we call it in Germany Hinterland. This is land we cannot use it properly because there's no road or something. You cannot put a building on it. The site is simply too big. And normally when you are making a market value assessment, such hinterland is only valued by 50% of this Vorderland, we call it, this main land. And the problem is, in order to make it accurately, we would have to say for every site, are there such particular characteristic? Right now, it is not possible. This is not a big deal right now because the property tax in Germany is not very high. So such accurate valuation, we can tolerate it because it's not very high. And right now in Baden-Württemberg, they have also the possibility to make an application to say, look, tax office, here we have big hinterland, and you cannot value it the same as this Vorderland. And so please put a lower value on it. And normally it should work. However, it is not very satisfying. We have to think about how to change this. This is not the only thing. This is only an example of problems we are also challenging. So the judgment, considering distributional aspects, the land value tax is highly progressive if you make the relation to the real estate as a whole. So when you have a high land value, the whole real estate will be very expensive, mostly driven by the land. And when we are putting an even tax rate on the land, we will get a progressive effect if we relate it to the market value of the property as a whole. As I told you, we will have lower basic rates for housing. This means more tax is shifting onto commerce and to industry in Baden-Württemberg. This is simply because they don't represent so many voters, and politicians do it according to the votes. Considering the planning and allocation, we don't tax the upstanding building. This means we don't tax additional living space we are creating. We have a reduced tax burden on compact housing, and this was one of the most important reasons why the natural protection organizations supported the campaign, because they want to have more compact housing, more compact settlement, and no urban sprawl. And we have a higher taxation of unused sites. However, also in Baden-Württemberg, a property tax C for unused sites, it is attached. And this is also discussable because how to say, what you need for the budget is not necessarily the same you need in order to mobilize unused sites. However, as geologists, we know the best would be put 100% on the land value, but this is not feasible right now. Implementation, I always suggested them, please make a hardship regulation. They didn't make a hardship regulation, but I told you, you can make application. If you see the valuation is unjust, they can make an application. Please change the valuation, give a lower value to the hinterland, for instance. Yeah, what have been the biggest political issues in this whole discussion? They said, okay, housing should not become more expensive in some cities. For instance, in Berlin, the level of the price level and the rent level was quite low. Nonetheless, the increase was quite high. 2 years ago, Berlin was the city with the highest increase of rents in the whole world. And there have been the worries that a change of the property tax could fuel this increase. Also, we all know the land value tax theoretically is hard to be shifted up on tenants. However, in Germany, we have some specific regulations to protect the tenants, which means very often the real rents are below what is possible to take. And many were worried that if you are introducing a land value tax, particularly in the better locations, this could be used in order to shift it up onto the tenants and to increase the rents. Okay, I told you Baden-Württemberg, this was a victory. The big question is, was it a Pyrrhic victory? This means we won the battle, but we didn't win the war. Why? So when you are looking, for instance, on the OECD countries, you see when you are looking at income tax and so on, also on the employees' fees for social insurance and so on, the employers' fees and so on. Germany is the second highest, taxing the second highest in the whole OECD. And OECD, for that, since many years, they said, Germany, please take away the tax burden from the production factor work, labor, and put it either to the value added tax. You all know it is not a very good idea, or put it on the property tax. And the question is, can you put it on the property tax? Now in Germany, we have a system which is very fragmented. So we have, you remember the picture in the beginning, we have a federal system and we have some different system in the different states. How to make such a tax shift with such a fragmented system? So this is very difficult to do. I recently wrote an article together with the former finance minister of Rhine-Palatinate, Carsten Kühl. This was also crazy. This guy was not supportive in the beginning, and after he was not finance minister anymore, he said, Dirk, now I understand the system. It was a mistake that I didn't support it. Now I see it. So let's make efforts in order to save what can be saved. And so he was thinking about how to make such a tax shift. We made some proposals how to do it. We said better to reduce the business tax and to put it onto the property tax. And yeah, this would be also an incentive maybe for the renegades, maybe to think over what they have done and to take away their area-related tax, and maybe even so in the future to introduce such land value tax. We will see what will happen. I'm not very hopeful in this regard. So this is a sort of mission impossible, such a tax shift in the current situation. And here I'm a little bit pessimistic. We won in Baden-Württemberg, and maybe we can also get in the future some of the renegade states, particularly when the stuff is at court. I'm sure it will get to court, and I'm also sure that some constitutional courts will have very much thoughts on this error-related tax models, and they probably cancel some. But the big question is, will whole Germany make such a land value tax? And only then a tax shift would be possible, and only then this would be a possibility to get a step further to the idea Henry George had. Yeah, what were the political lessons learned? The political lessons were that land value tax is not a bestseller. Although this tax is very easy to be implemented and to be administered, it is very difficult to be understood and very difficult to be explained. Not everybody can do it. And what we also learned was that this land value tax, at least in Germany, it will hardly come out of the political parties. The political parties are organizations which are pushed. They don't develop new ideas. They take the pressure they get from civil societies. And this is the point. You need campaigns in the civil society in order to push the politicians that they are coming on the right way. They don't get this idea alone. So what we did quite good was a union of powerful NGOs. You have to convince them, and you have to make out narratives. You have to tell different stories. For instance, for the associations of the tenants, you have to tell another story as for associations of commerce and so on. But you all can catch them because it is all advantageous for them, but with different stories. And another point is the land value tax, economically, it is logical. It is a very good tax, but the political logic is quite different than the economic logic. And is not always the same, and you have to also to understand what is the political logic behind. Important arguments are in this regard the shifting tax of the tax on the tenants. Although this argument is weak, it was very much stressed. The mobilization of land, also the effect on land prices, which has not been understood very often. Many said, oh, the land will be more expensive. We said, no, it will be cheaper. But the argument for the people is sometimes difficult to understand. What was very important was the simplification argument, particularly in Germany. You know, maybe in Germany we have 1% of the world population, but we have, I think, 10 or something percent of the world tax literature. It's very complex here. And so the simplification argument was a very good argument. And as I told you, we have to adapt the arguments according to the recipients. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and maybe we can get into the discussion.
Okay, I will read the questions that have been put on the question and answer panel, and after that I will get to the ones in the chat. So Bill Batt asks, do you have percentage figures on the revenue collected from each property class, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, and other?
Yeah, we have this, but as I told you, it is for the old property tax. Here we have the figures, and I can say, okay, the property tax A on agriculture and forestry is very low. it is of very low importance also. This is also a question you could ask whether it makes sense to make it that low. We also can say how much we get from agriculture and from dwelling, and we also made these calculations. We made a lot of calculations for different models, which will be the burdens. So we have all these data. It's for every text model, it is different.
Okay, the next one looks more like a comment than a question, but let me read it. Land value can only be fully applied when all forms of government work together, federal, province, and municipal. Even the treasury will have to work with the government. Denmark is a good example.
Yes, it's true. And that's the big problem in Germany. Now we had a success in Baden-Württemberg. We only can hope that people look at Baden-Württemberg and that it will work well. However, what I didn't mention in my presentation was that Baden-Württemberg has basically the worst preconditions to introduce such a property tax because the valuation system is the worst. The valuation of this guiding value, it is a matter of the states. So Baden-Württemberg is responsible for their states, Rhine-Palatinate is responsible for their state, North Rhine-Westphalia is responsible for their state, and so on. It is not centralized. And Ted, as an assessor, he knows when you want to assess, you need to compare. And if the comparison is only until the next church, well, it is difficult to make a proper assessment. So I was also a member in the Federal Construction Land Commission, and we said we need a centralization of the assessment system. Nonetheless, this is also a political question because the states, they want to keep the competences, which means they don't want a centralization. Also, from how to say, from an assessment point of view, it would make a lot of sense to centralize, to collect the data, to make a big database that it is possible to have a good comparison. The states don't want because they want to keep the competence to make their own definition. This is quite unreasonable, but this is another example for the contradiction of political logic and the economic logic.
First question from the chat from Nicholas Rosen. Does Liberal Party mean the FDP?
Yes, Liberal Party means the FDP. FDP is normally it is the party which says it is supportive to the performance. People who perform very well, who work very hard, and so on, they should have more, and those who are lazy should have less. We are market economy and so on, but fact is that they are very supportive to big lobbyists. They are supportive to such groups who are grabbing the rents, and also real estate, big real estate companies which have their stakes in the best locations. They are supporting them, and they were the biggest supporters of such an area-based tax. We also talked with these guys. I also was once in North Rhine-Westphalia, and there was also a judge of the financial court, and he also was FDP member and also supported land value tax. There were also they made some decisions. There was a lot of politicians in the FDP which said we should introduce a land value tax. Nonetheless, the prevailing opinion was no land value tax. This is not good for our supporters, for our voters, because these are rich people which are grabbing the rents. So this was the logic. And so I'm very disappointed from this Liberal Party. Some of these liberals, they made a good job. They tried to push the issue inside their parties, but many of them, most of them, they really didn't understand what market economy is, and they didn't understand what meritocratic systems are.
The next comment is, vielen Dank für Sprechen. In Deutschland muss die Zeit ganz spät sein. Sie haben echte Arbeit hergestellt, während führte ich, dass wir zu oft nur reden.
Thank you very much. This was a thank you, and I see somebody is speaking quite good German. Yeah, it was. I think we can act. We have very good arguments, and we can push our issue into politics. It's possible, but we also need. And this was really one thing I understood within this campaign. We need allies. We have to come together with other members of society, and also it pains. It is pain. We have to make compromises. So we cannot make 100% land value tax immediately. First, this was always our idea to make land value tax at a low level, and the second stage to increase the rates and to make a tax shift. But the first is you have to introduce it in some states. The same holds for the United States. You have to introduce it first. And in the second stage, you can think about how to increase the rate and how to make a tax shift. But for introducing such a tax, you have to find allies. And these allies you can find if you try it.
The next comment is by Brian Kavanaugh. Congratulations. What excellent intensive work, Dirk, though obviously frustrating in many areas. Yes, and always these attempts to fiddle with the land rating base to benefit residential owners at a cost to commercial interests, although commercial land is valued considerably higher anyway.
Yeah, this is also another example for political logic, which is not the same as the economic logic. According to the economic logic, you would say, okay, one tax rate for everything, and then yeah, the market will make it. But according to the political logic, they say, okay, they are our voters, and we want to how to say, not to disappoint our voters, and so the owners of shops and so on, commercial land, they are not that important as the others, and that's it. I was also not very happy, but okay, this was another compromise we had to take.
So Richard Joshua says, valuations of land LVT in Pennsylvania sound like Baden-Württemberg. I guess it's just a comment that land valuations are rarely done well anywhere you look. There are some exceptions, which Ted could probably tell us about, but it's just so common, unfortunately, to see land valuation done badly.
Yeah, as I told you, Baden-Württemberg has a poor assessment system. It is one of the poorest in whole Germany, and this is the astonishing thing. In the state with the poorest land valuation system, they are making such a thing. Yeah? Several years ago, we had, I told you, it is the best that you centralize it, that you pool the data, that you have comparison. But in Baden-Württemberg, we had more than 1,000 valuation committees. So this means almost every city had their own valuation committees, and they made the valuation, got the data only from the city. They didn't have comparisons from other cities and so on. And there were some people, some mayors with an Excel table, and they tried to make valuation. This was how they did. It was crazy. Eh? Right now, they are improving it very much and very quickly. So they are making big progress with the valuation system. But basically, in Baden-Württemberg, it is bad. It would be better to make it, to make directives, to make it comparable system in the whole federation, also a comparable endowment with labor force. Some states give a lot of money in the valuation system, others give very few money into the valuation system. Also, the methods of valuation should be the same. Only with identical methods, you really can compare, and this we don't have, and Baden-Württemberg was particularly bad. Right now, they're improving with very huge steps, because they see, wow, in 2022 we need to have values, and we only have bullshit right now, and so they are afraid that there will be a lot of cases brought to the court. They don't want to have it. I hope they will be successful, because how Germany is looking on them, how does this land value tax system work? And this is also a certain risk that due to this poor valuation system, it still could fail. I hope they do their best. They made big progress, but it is a certain risk.
Now, Dan Sullivan makes a comment on a practice that occurs in the United States in some places, I don't know how frequently, where we have an equalization commission that takes account of the average valuation rate in different places and reports what they must be multiplied by to equalize them. So he says the central government can collect data and equalize the assessments. That means each province can have its own assessment system, and the central government can adjust for provinces that underassess compared to other provinces. Now, I wonder, is there any transfer, is there any part of the property tax that goes to governments above the local, or is it all local government? Does it all go to the unit that does the assessment?
The revenue goes to the local government. The assessment is made it depends on the states. In some states, it is quite local. In some states, it is regional. This is quite different.
But in some places in the United States, there is an advantage to a locality of underassessing, because then it looks poor and it gets more of a subsidy from the state for education or something like that. But it sounds to me like you might not have any fiscal consequences of a lack of equalization in Germany.
Yeah, I think the system in USA and in Germany, they are a little bit different in this regard. Huh?
Yeah.
But yeah.
And Terry Dwyer from Australia sends his thanks and regards.
Yeah, hi, Terry. Nice to see you here.
And that is all the comments that have been put into the chat and all the questions that are put in the question and answer session. If there are more, those of you who are online will have to let us know.
I just wanted to say to Dirk how impressed I was with his first slides about how he found other groups, professional groups and architects and so forth that got involved in this project and kind of, all worked together to bring about this success of having a land value tax in this state.
Exactly. We had also involved the architects. For instance, the architects are very helpful. Particularly the architects. I always a little bit disappointed. Nick probably knows, can understand my feeling about the fellow economists, but the architects are very critical. They supported the idea of land value tax very much, and they are still doing. Also, the assessors, some of these assessors were quite, they understood it is not easy to assess the space of a house, but it is much easier if you have a good assessment system in the states, in the provinces, to assess the land value. So this they understood, and if you have some experts which support you, it is you also have a quite good standing in the political discussion, and this was also an advantage we had.
That reminds me of a question that I have. Dirk. I wonder whether your conversations in private with economists help at all, or are they just as obstinate? Do you ever manage to change somebody's mind in a private setting where they don't have to worry about what they sound like?
I was asking me the same question. Of course, we discussed a lot, and there also have been many economists, how to say, who thought about it. I don't know how many we really could convince. I think we could convince some of them. There have been also some reviews about the opinion of economists, and they found that in Germany, more than half of the economists, they are supportive to land value tax. So it is the majority who are sympathetic to this idea. Nonetheless, there are also some, for instance, maybe you saw this guy, Clemens Fuß, he's the director of one of the biggest institute in Germany. I met him also in the Federal Budget Committee, and he was in favor of this proposal of area-related property tax. And I told him, you are an economist. So as an economist, you should know that what you are supporting is not the best thing to do. And in former times, I also saw him writing arguments in favor of land value tax. I told him, so in former times you were supportive to land value tax. Out of sudden you get money from these rent grabbers associations, and then you're critical about land value tax. And then he was this and that and that. I was not really critical, and so I see the advantages.
Well, let me give you a different perspective on this. If you go back and look at Adam Smith, one of the things that Adam Smith says is that the tax on land in England has no distorting effects, even though it is based on an assessment from 1688. Yeah. And so you could say you're right, that a badly assessed tax or an unequally assessed tax is just as neutral as an equally assessed tax. So it's not a matter of a bad incentive effect of the tax. It's only a matter of not getting what you can from the tax and of being terribly unfair.
Yeah, we stress this neutrality argument. By the way, Nick, this is also a problem, because when we talked with the economists, our argument was it is a neutral tax, a complete neutral tax. You wrote about it. When we were talking with the natural protection organizations, they supported land value tax because they said it's not neutral. We are, we are.
Well, I have an article somewhere that says land taxation is better than neutral.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know that. Okay.
Yeah, but you know, it's a very, how to say, a very, it's an argument you can understand when you're an economist, but most of these guys, they are no economists, they cannot understand it very easily.
Yes.
We made different stories. We said, okay, nonetheless, may the truth be as it is, but we tell these natural protection guys another story than the economists.
Well, Mason Gaffney used to say quite properly that one of the effects of land value taxation is to make for compact cities, and therefore for more land that doesn't need to be developed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but also the same. In my eyes, this is no contradiction. This dense cities, this compact cities, and the neutrality. For me, it is no contradiction. But it is difficult to explain the argument to non-economists. And so for the sake of simplification, we made different stories, different narrative.
I understand there's another question here, but my window was too small to see it. Let me read Nicholas Rosen's question. I need to change the size here to see it all. May I quote and summarize what you have said from my weblog? Ich bin der Mensch, der Deutsch benutzt hat. Ich kann die Sprache mit einem Wortenbuch übersetzen. Ich habe Deutsch besser sprechen können, als ich Student war. Aber kürzlich habe ich wenig Übung mit gesprochenem Deutsch gehabt.
Okay, this was about the German skills, but I think it's quite good right now.
What was the question? Would you explain it?
I think this was a real question. Huh?
Well, it was, he wants to quote you in his weblog, his blog, and my German isn't quite good enough. I can almost pronounce all the words. Dirk, can you open up the question and answer section?
Ja, ich bin der Mensch, der Deutsch benutzt hat. Ich kann die Sprache mit einem Wörterbuch übersetzen. Ich habe Deutsch besser sprechen können, als ich Student war. Aber kürzlich habe ich, he said that in former times he spoke very well German, but he got out of, he didn't have so much exercise recently. This was not really a question from Mr. Rosen. He is missing practice. But it's quite good what he's writing.
So let's see. I think that there's another comment or two on the chat blog. Well, no, that was just about the one that was in the questions and answers. Are there other questions that people have? Here's an anonymous attendee. Two German nationals have told this viewer that if one purchases a real property parcel in Germany and sells it at a higher price before 10 years have elapsed, the entire difference between the purchase price and the sale price is taxed. Is that true? If so, is the purpose of that law to discourage flipping of property parcels?
No, this is not true. The point is, when you are selling a site, a house, let's say real estate as a whole, which you have been using for renting it out, not for living inside yourself, then within a time of 10 years between buying and selling, the increase of value is taxed. After 10 years, it is not taxed anymore. And this is, for instance, a thing we also try to change, to put it into the income tax law, that this exemption is abolished, that every increase is taxed. But basically, after this 10 years, it is completely tax-free. And this is the reason why many people are waiting after buying a house or a flat, renting it out. They are waiting for 10 years and then selling it tax-free. And this is also one reason why the German property market is quite immobile. It is not very mobile. And the supply of real estate is lower than it should be, and this also increases the prices.
Let me bring up another idea that I learned about from Michael Hudson, and it took me a while to appreciate it. And this is the idea that if you want to collect the rent of land from the people who are getting it now, you should send the tax bill when there is a mortgage, not to the title holder, but to the mortgage holder, or at least to the extent that the mortgage holder is the legally the person entitled to collect the rent. He should be the one that we go to when we want to collect the rent back for public purposes. Have you encountered this idea, and do you have an opinion of it?
We didn't encounter this in our campaign because we tried to make the arguments as slim as possible and not to put other stuff on it. I think it's a very interesting idea. The question I would pose is, what about those real estate, those land which is without mortgage, which is paid completely with private money?
Then you send the tax bill to the title holder.
Yeah, okay.
So you send the tax bill to whoever has been collecting the rent.
Yeah, okay. That's a good idea. I think can do it. The question is how in detail to organize it on the background of different institutional background.
Yes.
And sometimes the rent is also separated. A certain share of the rent is collected by the banks, and another share of the rent is collected by the official.
So one of the ways I thought about creating the institution for it was to say that you continue to send the tax bill to the title holder, but you could tell him that to the extent that he has to send the rent to somebody else, he can send his tax receipts as evidence that he has paid.
Yeah, the idea is good. I think should pursue it. Yeah, indeed. I also heard about that a long time ago, but we didn't want to put it into the discussion because it was.
It makes things more complicated, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But it's an extra little bit of dessert for the aficionados. Well, we're getting about to the time that we plan to end, and there seems to be no more discussion. So we'd like to thank you very much for your time and for all of your efforts to promote land value taxation in Germany. Thank you very much, Dirk.
And thank you very much for your support. I always felt at home in the Georges group, and particularly this evening, here it's night, I was happy to see your faces, Ted and Nick, and also saw Terry there inside. It was nice to see you again.
Okay, goodbye.
Before you leave, we should thank all of you again. And we need to thank our 2021 sponsors, John Beck, Tully Cleveland, Mario Cordovo, Kathleen Cummings, the Foundation for Economic Justice, Damon Gross, our own Ted Gortney, Jonathan Hall, Gib Helverson, Sue Hunzel, Dave Jassel, who's been on, Ralph Rivera, the Center for Public Dialogue, and the late Walt Rybeck, Common Ground USA, Earth Shoring Associates with Mark Sullivan and Osamu Uehara, the Henry George School of Chicago, the Henry George Institute, the International Union for Land Value Taxation, the Public Revenue Education Council, and lastly but not least, the Robert Schockelbeck Foundation. We really appreciate it. Next month, we'll be on back to our normal third Thursday of the month, and we're honored to have James Galbraith, who will be speaking on what is economics, a policy discipline for the real world. It will be based on this rather long article, which will be in the write-up. He'll focus on how, instead of abstract models, economics should address real world questions, as of course did Henry George. And our moderator for that session will be Polly Cleveland. So we thank you and have a good evening all.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.